How many times, as a learning designer or training designer, you actually have been given a goal to design a training program that must reduce time to proficiency of learners? Probably not so often. That's one of the reasons why training and learning interventions fail to develop learners at the speed of business. In this research based presentation, I will walk you through 15 potential flaws we learning designers tend to build into our curriculum, which instead of developing our learners' performance at a faster rate, actually hampers it other way. Well, I'm Dr. Raman, based in Singapore. I was educated and trained as an engineer. I have a master's degree in electronics engineering. Over time, I have developed myself into a performance scientist. I research, write, speak, and train on how human learning occurs and how people gain expertise at an accelerated rate. In this talk, I'm hoping to add some value to your learning profession drawn from my research, working experience, and books. Imagine an employee working for you takes 1 year to become good in his job. That's a massive amount of cost and opportunity lost, isn't it? That's the foundational reason why would an organization want to develop their employees at a faster rate. Because employees are the powerhouse to innovation. If they prepare learners or employees at a faster rate, it also means they would make fewer mistakes, saving a considerable sum of money that otherwise would be incurred to address those mistakes. They can innovate faster by coming up to speed faster on new technologies. That helps the organizations shorten time to market for the products or services. Naturally, organizations which can develop employees at a faster rate would stand out in the competition because employees would produce solutions at the pace of business and able to meet customer expectations. They start bringing business. Nevertheless, that's the money value of time. I used some heavy words like proficiency, speeding up proficiency, or time to proficiency. Let me expand upon and qualify these terms. Let's first start with the term proficiency. What does proficiency mean to you? Well, in general terms, it means being good at something. It may also mean mastery in a certain job or function or skill. In organizations, employees are the fuel of business engine. They need to be able to perform their function or job to establish standards. They need to be independently productive, so they do not require much supervision. From that point onwards, they are fully ready to produce the best possible business results in every possible situation, customer, or challenges in that job role. That is the intent of defining proficiency. However, term proficiency is largely misunderstood in business and academic literature. Proficiency is measured at a job role level. That means we don't measure it for a task or skill or competency. It's a measurement of the matrix for the job role. Let's take the example of firefighters. If your house is on fire, the fireman that comes to your home, what kind of performance do you expect from him? You want someone who is good at putting off the fire, right? And simply doesn't not tell you that he is getting better at using a water hose, but he's not so good at breaking the door. What you don't care about what he learned or what kind of examination or assessment he has passed. What concerns you is if he can meet the job matrix, which is putting out the fire quickly. More importantly, you want him to be consistent. You don't want his performance to simply fail and fall when it was just about your turn. Someone who has demonstrated consistently, not one time, consistently. Let's take another example of a salesperson, probably with great negotiation skills and also ability to make cold calls. But that doesn't matter if he can't produce a sales of $1 million per over the 6 months, every month $1 million consistently. What it means is being good at an activity such as making cold calls does not directly relate to being proficient in producing that much sale. As a manager or organization, you care about his ability to generate much business outcomes consistently, no matter he has top-notch negotiation skills or not. So proficiency is not about learning a task, skill, or activity. However, this discussion about expected desired proficiency for any job role is almost missing in conversations between business leaders and learning designers. Those organizations who pay attention to the trajectory of employees or learners toward that state of proficiency are the ones who can actually do something to develop them faster to that point. And where does it start? It starts with you, the learning designers. But the real disconnect is that most organizations, educational institutions, and professional training institutes fail to deliver proficiency out of their training programs. We learning designers forget to ask about proficiency metrics of the roles and then design training to attain that proficiency. Because we start delivering programs meant for skills, tasks, and activities, not for outcome, not for consistency, not for proficiency. Let's expand upon the term time to proficiency. Time to proficiency in any role is measured from the day of starting from into a role until the desired point of proficiency. In simple terms, if we assume proficiency and time is a linear function, then we can assume the piecewise representation of proficiency curve. Learners or employees achieve desired proficiency for their job role in time N6 on this graph. If somehow we could accelerate their rate of proficiency acquisition, if they can achieve the same performance in a shorter time, that would accelerate proficiency. That would be reduction in time to proficiency. So it's achieving that state of consistent performance sooner that meets set thresholds. Learning designers mostly mistake the meaning of this as accelerated learning. However, it's not about learning some content faster or even doing some training in a shorter time. It is about how soon that state of consistent business results can be achieved. Shortening training duration might help us put the person on the desk sooner, but he or she may not be there in terms of proficiency, where he can deliver the required customer satisfaction from the transaction. Let me give you a quick landscape of a large case study I conducted in 2018. My goal was to explore how organizations have increased the slope of proficiency curve. From 366 experts, I identified who had proven experience in achieving a substantial reduction in time to proficiency. 85 project leaders participated from 7 countries, 42 industries, 20 business sectors. Thus, the research was quite comprehensive across several contexts. I conducted over 74 in-depth interviews, gathered 56 documents, and analyzed 66 start-to-end project cases. Project cases mean the whole journey from start to end in a project case, starting from problem statement to the results, how they did it. Then I compared and analyzed the cases across several dimensions, such as how a thing worked in one industry and did not in another. The research revealed powerful insights for the first time ever in terms of how organizations actually shorten time to proficiency. And today, I am going to give you some peeks into those revelations. Across all the 66 projects, the organizations, of course, expected training to support it. It's so common sense to expect so, isn't it? After all, don't we say training and learning are the first line of defense for employees? But it shocked them that the training was the foremost blocker to speed to proficiency. It actually hampered speeding up. This was a common thread across all the organizations, and that tells us that they all consistently seem to have pinpointed the root cause. Well, mostly. Training per se is not the blocker, because the goal of training is to provide quickest possible readiness to the learners. But the real issue was the training and learning design practices. Here is what I found. The reason for the inefficient design was that the training was designed using conventional objectives to impart skills and knowledge. The training was never designed for speed. How many times you get an objective or project goal that reads like design a training course which delivers the same skills in 5 days instead of 10 days? Probably quite often. But shortening training does not mean a person will become proficient quickly. Now think about how many times you got this kind of objective. Design a training course which ensures employees in a job role attain proficiency in 6 months as opposed to 18 months. Probably never. The key issue with conventional training is that its goal is grounded in delivering skills, knowledge, and content. It does focus on changing behaviors, but not a whole lot. So the way we design training and learning, it ends up delivering skills and knowledge effectively, but it does not accelerate the time to proficiency. Reason? We never considered time to proficiency as one of the key input to analysis or need assessment phase. Let me describe these observations with a very simple example of a financial analyst's job. I have oversimplified it for this talk. An organization hires a financial analyst. The job description states that he or she is responsible for preparing and sending weekly trend dashboards, reports to business groups, design reports as per stakeholder satisfaction. The individual in this position would need strong Excel software skills. Sounds like typical job description, isn't it? More often, this is what you get to know as a learning designer. But how one would know if the analyst is proficient or not at a given point of time? What is that point when we can deem her fully productive? The proficiency definition would read something like this: accurate trend dashboard reports by the end of each Friday, meeting average customer satisfaction score of 4.6 out of 5 for consecutive 6 weeks. How often business managers actually give you such a definition for a given role before asking you to design a training intervention? Not very often. Here is one typical example of a training plan designed for such new hires. Upon joining, she is asked to go through some basic web-based training and orientation while waiting for formal training. The formal training class is 5 days long, offered by third party, covering for foundations of Excel, graph, computation, and advanced functions. She received a 400-page manual, a certificate after attending the class, and some job aids plus an online resource. The manager assigns her to generate and send a weekly dashboard of expenses to key officials. She's told, in case any problem, approach Joe. Her dashboard misses the deadline of Friday on several occasions. Her first feedback score of 4.6 is achieved in 3 months, but then it drops again. It took her 4 months to reach the stage where her dashboard went out consistently on every Friday and bagged over 4.6 scores. Ignore the last block for a moment. Does it sound like training plan from your organization? Does it sound like something you developed? If yes, then you need to listen to my remaining talk. Now, the only difference you might see between the training plans you typically developed versus this one is the presence of current time to proficiency, which does not normally appear in objectives of the conventional training or learning design. It is If it is not given, you would not know that you need to design learning to reduce it. Inefficient training design may lead to longer time to proficiency. Instead, at a top level, I identified four major categories of inefficiencies. The categories were related to the factor that go in design, the factors that go in the delivery side of the skill development, the factor that go in support before or after the training, the factors that support objectives or expectations from training. We are going to get into the details of these ones. Over 100 different factors were identified across 66 projects that were in fact coming on the way to accelerate proficiency. These were then grouped into 15 key inefficiencies. These 15 inefficiencies were then grouped into four major categories. Now, since the sample size was large and much wider spectrum, one can say that the observations are very universal, and invariably every organization's training design would hamper the speed to proficiency. In my book, Designing Training to Shorten Time to Proficiency, I explained 400 factors that form or contribute toward these 15 key inefficiencies. You might want to get a copy of that. It also talks about the strategies that are required to address these inefficiencies. So for now, we are going to stick on these 15 inefficiencies only. What I observed is that most of the training specialists copy the typical academic way of designing training programs into corporate settings. What is it? Lecture style, classroom style, instructor centric, paper based assessments. All of that using obsolete learning theories, not applicable anymore in workplace settings. So design requires them to start with a massive task analysis that leads to defining performance objectives in terms of activities and tasks. The goals are short term, what to be achieved during the training program. And in most cases, it means training is done when instructor is done with covering 400 pages of slides on different features of Excel software. Result, topic-wise binder given to learners, like chapters for each topic in Excel software, or they focus on tasks like how to sort data, how to create graphs, etc. And no section on how to build a business dashboard and explain it to executives. This kind of approach is so content focused that it emphasizes memory of rules and practice in the classroom on some worked examples. Then the content is built as maybe you also need this. Perhaps you would need this also, as opposed to understanding what is really needed at the job. The issue with this then remains that the instructor drives all the training. Even if they use theories like learner-centric, it depends heavily on instructor to run it. And if at all this structure is moved to e-learning, guess what? It leads to massive instructor-read slides captured as videos. And this kind of curriculum, if packed in 5 days, in fact will impair the transfer to workplace. When the individual need to perform the task, what happens? He would have already forgotten, and all they do is Google search. If the content can be searched from Google, why train at the first place? In such situations, training basically wasted time as opposed to saving time. We gave them things they did not link up toward the proficiency goals. In my analysis of the training solution, training basically took people away from the context of the job they were supposed to work in. For instance, in actual settings, a financial analyst is supposed to work with a team of peers and stakeholders while handling several conflicts. But how do we train them? Individually with others in the same job role, but not necessarily working under the same manager. We train them in a safe classroom environment, away from actual stress, pressure, or expectations of the work. Any learning in the training intervention does not translate to proficiency in the job. A financial analyst is assessed for her ability to explain the expenses in the form of impact to the business and decisions it can be derived from it. But how do we tend to assess them in the training? Using some hypothetical example, sometimes written exams, or exams on computer. Unless we measure proficiency in training intervention same way as in the real life, any level of training wouldn't help in accelerating proficiency. Also, since there is so much content that there is hardly much time to practice everything, proficiency requires repetitions across various situations. The skills imparted in training intervention is remotely nowhere what is really needed. Now, if we want them to reach to the goals at a faster rate, very important piece is that the managers have to support them in that journey. But what happens is opposite. What I noted is that managers typically think trainers are magicians who would transform and get the employees ready with some magic wand. Managers don't realize that their involvement makes a huge difference in regards to knowing what is being covered in training and how he or she should design projects to enhance and speed up the proficiency. But in reality, managers don't even read the course description. They hardly ever communicate the correct goals to the learning designers. They don't even specify the proficiency expectations to the learning designers. And above all, managers don't even specify target time to proficiency. Then how learning designers could deliver a course or program that can indeed achieve that time? In the absence of all this alignment, learning designers would design a program that would have all the issues we discussed in the first category. Also, there is a disconnect that the learning designer or trainers are done once a program is done. There is a lack of a mechanism to check how this financial analyst is now doing and what component in the training program is indeed making time to proficiency so lengthy. Again, every such feedback loop, if exists, is tied back to what's wrong in the training. Rather than questioning, maybe manager did not assign the correct support, tools, mentorship to the learner after the training. Sometimes post-training mentorship is something like this. Go and sit with Joe. And if Joe is not available, then sit with Jim. That kind of unplanned on-the-job training hampers speed rather than accelerating it. It's not always training curriculum's fault. These last set of inefficiencies are more about after effect of inconsistencies caused by poor training design. Foremost is that training is designed with an underlying assumption that people will learn a lot of stuff in the field. So training becomes an information giving avenue rather than proficiency giving avenue. The biggest issue is that people who develop training are typically not the ones who are actually working in the field. They develop based on their previous experiences, which may not be applicable anymore. If an organization is to employ a learning designer who had experience in Excel some 10 years ago and has no idea how to use state-of-the-art dashboard software like HANA, Click, or several others, or perhaps has never stepped inside the executive boardroom, probably have never defended a business dashboard in high-pressure situations, how to expect him or her to develop a training or a learning experience for a financial analyst to be successful in front of executives? We leave a lot on the personal traits of the people to make them successful on the job rather than focusing on the core skills to make them proficient in the job. These inefficiencies collectively hamper the speed rather than accelerating. Here is the quick summary of 4 types of inefficiencies and 15 key inefficiencies presented in this talk. And this one is a more tabular summary of the main point I have talked so far. When you look at 15 inefficiency, you need to look in context of typical training path. The first graph on the left is what I described in the case of a financial analyst. Now you design training for acceleration. You need to think of total trajectory before, during, and after the formal training. You need to decide what you could put a learner to do before they get a chance to do formal training. Then you need to design training avoiding 15 inefficiencies we talk about in a way that the learner come out more capable from a training session. One of the several ways you could do so is by making sure training is designed around actual job scenarios and problems and is not about content. Then as a designer, you must look at ways to provide a performance support system, OJT checklists, and other tools that will allow them to experience the job at an accelerated rate. This is where it is important to make sure managers and learning designers work together to design assignments or projects that indeed take learners towards shorter time to proficiency. For effective design strategies meant to accelerate proficiency, I'll provide you a resource at the end of the talk. How many of you heard about 70-20-10 learning model? The core premise of this model is that people learn only a tiny bit of their job from the formal interventions. In contrast, most of the learning either comes through others in social interactions or actually by experiencing it. Though the numbers 70-20-10 are indicative and only no scientific basis right now, but the point here is that formal interventions like classroom training are a small portion of the overall learning spectrum. Also be mindful that a performance achieved in training is usually not the job performance. Also, the goal of training or learning is not finished completely until someone reaches the desired proficiency. Then why not we focus on the entire journey of a learner and keep our eyes on the desired proficiency? No matter we need to design formal training, informal training, or social learning, or on-the-job interventions or other performance tools. Leading practitioners Rosenbaum and Williams, who wrote a book called Learning Path, says that time is a single universal commodity for businesses to establish a competitive edge. So the goal of training should be to reduce that time. If training does not help with accelerating that effort to prepare someone to do their job, then why do it? Perhaps we shouldn't even do the training then. The moment we rethink the goal of training and learning is not simply to provide knowledge, content, and skills, but it is to prepare employees or learners at a faster rate. A lot of mindset changes toward what really should happen for the business. I would like to close my presentation with an insightful quote by founder of 70-20-10 Institute, Dr. Charles Jennings. He says, the real answer to compressing time to expertise is that one has to look outside the training. Look at what is wrapped around it. Even if you are a core training and learning professional or designer or a leader, do think beyond training for a true accelerated performance. I hope this session is of value to you. If you still need some help, I have about 10 books on this topic. Mostly those are available in hardcover, available at leading stores. So you might want to look at any of those books. It's going to be having a lot of useful information. Here's my social media details in case you want to connect. In fact, I encourage everyone who's listening to this presentation, connect with me at YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. Join my learning portal at speedtoproficiency.com or ramankatri.com if you have keen interest in developing your knowledge about latest and greatest learning methodologies. Thank you so much.